All righty, good morning, everyone. Welcome, Shelley. Why don't we begin with a word of prayer? God of grace and everlasting glory, we give you thanks for the gift of another day. We pray that we may receive it faithfully and to use the time that you have given us fully and in ways that are pleasing in your sight. We ask you to bless us now as we gather to ponder the sacred words of long ago. Help us all to grow in wisdom and understanding, that we may be disciples of the risen Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. All righty, so we are looking at the Decalogue. That is Greek for deca, 10, and log, dialogue, is a conversation between two people. Decalogue is just the theological way of calling it the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. And I have a question for you. Where did Moses receive the 10 Commandments?
Which mountain?
Yes.
Was it Horeb?
Very good.
Yeah.
Mount Sinai, but you're going to see here that it's called Mount Horeb. So I'll explain that in just a moment.
Deuteronomy 5. And Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the rules that I speak in your hearing today, and you shall learn them and be careful to do them. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Not with our fathers did the Lord make this covenant, but with us, who are all of us here alive today. The Lord spoke with you face to face at the mountain out of the midst of the fire, while I stood between the Lord and you at that time, to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire, and you did not go up into the mountain. He said, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, and you shall not commit adultery, and you shall not steal, and you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his male servant, or his female servant, his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's.
All righty. So there you have the Decalogue. And as it says, Moses received these 10 commandments from God at Mount Horeb. Usually we associate the 10 commandments with Mount Sinai. So how do we reconcile this seemingly obvious discrepancy?
Different streams reporting.
Correct. So as I've said in the past, the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, were all originally part of an oral tradition tradition told from generation to generation. And people will sometimes say to me, well, how do you know that what finally got written down was what the oral tradition was originally? And my response to that is to say that it's sort of like the little kid who gets a parent to read a bedtime story. Even though they've heard the story 50 times, they want to hear the same story read to them. And what happens if the parent is a little tired and they skip over a part?
The child will correct.
The child knows exactly. So that's the same as the oral tradition. It was so embedded in the collective consciousness that it became just almost automatic. And so we know that the 5 books of Moses contain 4 different oral traditions. They're known by their letters, the J, the P, the D, and the E strands. J and E get their names or their letters because of the word that they use for God. So you read in the passage, and if you see in the original Hebrew, Elohim, God Most High, that's known as the E strand. The J strand is a sacred name that was given to Moses at the burning bush. And Moses says, if I go to see the Israelites and, I tell them that, I'm sent to lead them out, they're going to say, who sent you? And so Moses is asking, what is your name? God says, tell them I am sent you. And in Hebrew, it is known as the 4 letters, the tetragrammaton, YHWH. And in English Bibles, you can always tell when the sacred name of God is being used in the 5 books of Moses, because it's translated as Lord, and it'll be all capitalized. So if you see L-O-R-D and it's all capitals, it's the sacred name that was given to Moses from the burning bush, and that you are looking at the J strand. The P strand is the priestly strand, and that's a lot of the book of Leviticus. Like if somebody has a spot on their hand, they're ritually unclean, what do they have to do to be declared clean? It's all of the rituals and purity laws. And then the D is the Deuteronomy strand, which is primarily the book of Deuteronomy. So we actually have the 10 Commandments in 2 different places in the books of Moses. Deuteronomy, any guesses on where the other book is, or what the other book is, where we will find the 10 Commandments? You got a 1 in 4 chance, because we know it's in Deuteronomy, and the other books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers.
It's an Exodus, isn't it?
Say again?
Is it Exodus?
It is Exodus,
Yeah.
Exodus 20. And in the Exodus passage, you will see that Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Same mountain, just a different name in the different traditions. And so I always like Mark Twain's take on the 10 Commandments. And he said that we should be thankful that there are 10 commandments and only 10.
Didn't he break a couple on the way down or something?
Well, yes. So, yes.
I mean, broke the tablet.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
So-
slipped.
Moses goes to the top of Mount Sinai. He's up there, I think it's 40 days, which is the biblical terminology for a long time, because it was more than one cycle of the moon. And so he's up there, he comes down, and as he comes down, what does he find his brother Aaron and the children of Israel doing?
Now they're gold.
Yeah, they're busy making idols.
They're dancing around the golden calf. Now, here's a question for you. If I was a defense lawyer, I would make the argument, Moses, how can you give them a hard time? They haven't even gotten the commandment that says they're not supposed to make a graven image yet. You're bringing that down, and you're going to.
But it's a transfer of allegiance rather than.
Yes.
Great image.
Yeah. So it's the fact that they don't have the 10 commandments that says thou shalt not make a graven image. The very act is showing disloyalty to God. So Moses, in his anger, takes the tablets and he casts them down, and they break. And 45 years ago, I was at Mount Sinai. I climbed Mount Sinai, and I know the real reason why Moses was angry that day, because he knew he was going to have to climb that mountain again. And actually, right about now, maybe a month and a day from now, I will be at Mount Sinai again. I'm doing a land tour that will follow the route of the Exodus. So we'll start in Cairo and do the pyramids and everything, go out into the Sinai Desert, and down to Petra in Jordan, and back over the Jordan River. Even though it isn't a part of the Exodus story, we're going to stop at the traditional site of the baptism of Jesus. And then it ends on Mount Nebo, which is one of my favorite stories in Deuteronomy, the ending of the Pentateuch, 5 books of Moses. Moses climbs up Mount Nebo, looks over into the promised land, knowing that he will not lead the Israelites into the promised land because he struck the rock at Meribah and did not give God the credit for the miracle. And so Moses dies there on Mount Nebo. So here we have the 10 commandments. Any general thoughts before I delve into where I'm heading this Sunday?
What does it mean to not bear false witness against you?
So bearing false witness is specifically in terms of if a charge is made against someone, you should not basically lie in a proceeding. Okay. Some people generalize it and say you shall not lie.
But you're gonna set them up. You say, he did it.
Oh, well,
I saw you there on the night of the 27th.
Yeah. And in fact,
I didn't eat that cookies.
yes, I didn't eat it, you did.
You blame it on the person next to you.
Or you know what? I saw you playing cards on Sunday morning. Okay.
Well, yeah.
Or even more so, I'm trying to think, all of a sudden I got this popped into my head. Somebody was accused.
Brenda and I were in the back.
Yeah. Somebody, I'm trying to remember the story, the details. Somebody's accused of blasphemy and they stoned him to death. And no, I know what it is now. So in the Old Testament, the northern kingdom, after the kingdom of Israel splits, you have a northern kingdom of Israel and a southern kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom has a series of really bad kings, and one is particularly known for his wife, Ahab and Jezebel. And Ahab wants to buy a vineyard that belongs to a man by the name of Naboth. And this vineyard is right next to some of the king's lands. And so the king offers to swap lands with Naboth because he wants Naboth's vineyard. And Naboth refuses. And people back then have said, well, of course Naboth's going to refuse, because one of the worst things you could do is turn your back on your ancestral land. Okay, that was just considered an insult to your ancestors. So Naboth refuses. Ahab throws a little temper tantrum. Jezebel comes in and says, what's the matter? And he says, Naboth won't sell me his vineyard. So Jezebel says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And she hires two, theologically speaking, scumbags to accuse Naboth of blaspheming against God. And so Naboth is taken out, he's stoned to death. And because when you insulted God like that, you lost your ancestral inheritance, and so the king ends up with Naboth's vineyard. He doesn't have to give anything up. So that's bearing false witness. And
Paid off for him.
yes, it certainly did. But then eventually Ahab and Jezebel meet with a terrible demise.
Justice prevailed.
Yes, justice does prevail.
Story of Esther would be another one.
Okay, Esther, and that's the story of Purim. How are you thinking here? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, because the false witness of
Haman.
Haman, yeah.
Yeah, Haman resents Mordecai, who actually is the uncle of Esther. They're Jews, and Haman hates the Jews, and so he gets someone to bear false witness against Mordecai, not showing respect to the king. Although now that I think about it, I'm not sure it's actually false witness, because I think they were supposed to bow down to an image of the king. I'll have to go back and research that, but I understand where you're going with that, Don. So where I'm focusing on this morning is verse 9. Okay, so talking about graven image, you shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. So I am hard pressed to think of an example where jealousy is a good thing.
Yes, isn't there really a problem semantically? In other words, that is there a Greek word? I mean, it's probably isn't. No, this would have been Aramaic.
This would have been, Hebrew Aramaic.
Is there a better English word that
For translating this?
for translating? Because jealous. I can remember a friend of mine said that of all the how to say the emotions
Yeah.
that he would categorize, he thought jealousy was the most immature and petty and childlike and despiseful that he could think of.
Mm-hmm.
So that in a way that jealousy, the word jealousy has become a terribly pejorative or distasteful attribute.
Well, what is it? What is the phrase that we use to describe jealousy? We call it a green-eyed monster.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I find it hard to think of a single instance where jealousy is a good thing. And that's not true with all the other emotions, like fear, anger, sadness. I can think of instances where those emotions are good and godly, okay? If you see something that just isn't right and you get angry, it can motivate you to do something about it. Fear can be good and godly. If I'm standing at the Grand Canyon and I see a sign that says, danger, keep back, my fear of tumbling over the edge of the cliff is a good thing. In fact, it reminds me, many years ago, we took a youth group up to Gordon College to do the high ropes course, okay? And these kids are 20, 30 feet up in the air, and they're walking along these tight ropes, and they're in a harness and everything. And I'm thinking to myself, how do they know that harness is going to hold, is safe? Exactly. And finally, they got me to go up and do it. And I'll never forget it. There were 2 cords between 2 trees. And the second one, you stood on the lower one, and the second one was about 15 feet above you. And there were these ropes hanging down from the second one. and you had to get from one tree to the other. And you could use these ropes to hold on to, but they were just far enough so that you found yourself in no man or no woman's land where you kind of had to let go and maybe take a step or two to get the next one. All right, so I got from one end to the other. And I got to the far end and I said to the belayer, is that the term? The person who holds the rope that, yeah. So you have to say, when you're up there, embelay, and the person down below says embelay, which means he's ready, he's holding it. Okay. Oh, you ain't missed much.
I would not do it.
So anyways, I got to the end and I said, what do I do now? And the guy down below says, just step off the rope. I said, are you kidding me? And, how do I know that it's going to hold me or that, there isn't a little tear or something? And so I said, can I just go back to the other tree and shinny down? And he says, no, you got to lean back. Well, the only way I would do that is I had one of those ropes and I slowly lowered myself backwards, putting a little more weight until I knew it was safe. And then I held my breath. Okay. And now, I'm thinking about this, and literally in the paper this morning, there's a story about a woman who went skydiving. Okay. She's 104.
Oh, yeah.
She's 104.
She did a tandem skydiving jump because she wants to be in the Guinness Book of Records as the oldest person to go skydiving. 104. Fear is good sometimes.
No, what if she got to lose?
Yep,
Sorry, that's not
yep,
a nice thing
yep.
to say.
And actually, I'm going to qualify what I just said. I said greed is the only human emotion where I cannot think of a redeeming quality or a situation where it's a good thing. Greed. I can't think of a single instance where greed is a good thing.
The guy in the movie said greed is good.
The Michael Douglas in Wall Street. Money, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Yeah. So we have this consensus that jealousy is not a good thing. And yet we're told that our God is a jealous God. Explain that to me.
Would covetous be another?
No.
Covetousness is where you want something that is someone else's.
Righteous.
Yeah.
Say righteous what?
Righteous.
Righteous? Righteous jealousy? That's an interesting
God
thought.
is a righteous God. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I see. You would say righteous instead of jealous. I am a righteous God. And I think that's absolutely true. God is a righteous God.
How about indignant?
Indignant God?
Yes.
Okay.
But that's showing his wrath.
Well, but it's also interesting because if you look at what he says, because after it says, I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity on the fathers on the children of the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love. And other translations or other places in the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, it says showing steadfast love to thousands of generations. Thousands makes it sound like people living at the same time. If you look at other passages, it's clear that it's thousands of generations. So in other words, God gets angry, but it soon passes. Now, here's the other thing I will say. It's sort of along the lines, the sins of the fathers are visited upon the children to the third and the fourth generation. And that's true. If you think about it, if you think of a child that grows up in a very dysfunctional family where the father's off gambling and drinking and having an affair, so he comes home and he beats his wife, and then the child grows up and very often repeats it, and it sometimes gets worse. So I do not believe in a vengeful God. I believe in a God who allows our consequences to come home to roost, so to speak. But this is clearly saying that God is jealous. How can this jealousy be a good thing? After everything we've just said about all these different emotions.
Because it says the synonyms for, some of the synonyms for jealous are envious, covetous, resentful, grudging, begrudging, distrustful, mistrustful, doubting, insecure, anxious, possessive, proprietarial, overprotective. But it also says desirous, which I think is closer to what we really want. In other words, that it's God wanting his people to behave properly.
To behave properly, okay.
The word that stuck out was proprietary.
Proprietary. It's on like, I own you.
Yeah, but is God saying, I want you to make me your priority?
I want you to make me your priority.
Oh, I got that.
And there's also saying you can't serve two masters.
So in the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is talking about money and whatnot, he says you cannot serve God and mammon, or you cannot serve two masters. For either you will love the one and hate the other, or hate the one and love the other. Yep, absolutely. So I think you might be on to something. So Andy, you said you like proprietary.
Well, no, I guess I mean priority.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So as Tom was reading the synonyms, the one that stuck out in my mind or caught my attention was possessive. What does that mean?
We belong to God.
We belong to God, okay. And don't you forget it? Is that what this means when it says a jealous God? You belong to me and don't you forget it.
You belong to me or you'll be sorry.
Or you'll be sorry. They were back to those,
Well, I mean, look at the charge he gave to Adam and Eve in a way.
okay, what was the charge that he gave to Adam and Eve?
You're part of you're part of the garden, but we expect certain behavior from you.
Okay, expect certain behavior, okay. So when I think of jealousy, and I'm throwing this out as an illustration of how we look at it and what's not being said here, is there's a jealousy like the little girl on the playground who says to you, if you want to be my friend, you cannot be anybody else's friend. Okay, that's a jealousy. And that's not what's going on here. God is jealous, and I think this is the key right here. God, and let me ask you it this way. For whose sake is God jealous?
Yeah, for his and for ours.
Is it for God's, for our sake?
Yeah.
So how is God's jealousy for our sake?
He doesn't want you having other gods.
Okay, what happens if you have other gods?
Then you have two or more.
Okay,
God is jealous for our life, our future, how we live.
God is
He jealous for us to have a good life.
mhm. Jealous for us to have a good life. I think it's the key right there. When it says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, it isn't for God's sake. It isn't a needy God who says, I need you to know who, who brought you into this world, and and
Well, that's, yeah.
Mhm.
God is expressing God's investment in us, in creating us, as creating something that God would want to be.
Right.
That God would want to be wholesome, that God would want to be something significant.
Yes. God doesn't want any rivals, not for God's sake, but for our sake. Okay. God knows that when you have multiple gods, and as you were saying, Jane, you can't serve two masters. You're going to be pulled in different directions. And what I see God saying here is, I don't want some of you. I want all of you. Because I know that when you give me all of you, your life is going to be a whole lot better.
The Hindus having multiple forms. The story about the young man being Hindu and getting involved in a baseball team, creating, they wanted to win, so they pray to these different tangible gods.
Mm-hmm.
So he, in quotes, created a vehicle, a means or of getting there by creating one that the team worshipped to win.
Mm-hmm.
That dilutes what is being said here.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So in the Hindu, they have multiple gods, and they
But they don't
turn
have
to different.
multiple gods. They insist they have multiple roots of the same God. That's what they say.
Well, and actually, this is kind of a learning moment for me. Many years ago, our youth wanted to become familiar with other faiths in addition to Christianity. Did any of you know that there's a Hindu temple up in Andover? Go right up 28, just before you get to Route 495 on the right, there's a Hindu temple. So we went there, and it was fascinating. They were having some festival. We just happened to pick a good Friday to be there, and there's some festival. And they were pouring milk over the statue and giving it offerings of honey and cakes and things like that. And so I got talking to a couple of the people afterwards. And what I found out is that Hinduism does not believe in multiple gods. It is not a polytheistic faith. They believe in one God. What they believe, though, is that one God has manifested at various times, and that those manifestations embody different aspects of God. So to look at it through a Christian lens, it's almost as if Christians were to say that Jesus was born multiple times, and each time he embodied a different quality of God, like God's compassion or God's truth or God's love. And I found that very fascinating because, I'd always said, polytheistic and looked down on it. I'm not going to become a Hindu, but, it reminded me, be careful about judging others, because here I didn't understand their faith nearly as well as I probably should. So we do live in a world where we have multiple gods. What are some of the gods that are up?
Money is one of them.
Money? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Success.
Success, yeah.
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I could use this in a sermon, but I won't. So the story where Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Eli Manning all end up in heaven at the same time. And I'm trying to remember the stories, but it's something like God says, or Eli Manning says, where do you want me, God? And God says, I want you to sit here on my right. And Peyton Manning says, where do you want me, God? And God says, I want you to sit here on my left. And then God looks at Tom and says, Tom, you have anything to say? And Tom says, yeah, I think you're sitting in my seat. Now, the reality is that sports is a God. Okay, whatever you put first. And see, here's the thing. You cannot say, okay, I'm going to put God first on Sunday, and then, my business on Monday, and my family on Tuesday, and money on Wednesday. It doesn't work that way, okay? God is saying, I do not want part of you, I want all of you, okay? And this is where I get disgusted, and we're going to see it again this year, okay? December 24th this year. What day of the week is it?
It's Sunday.
Sunday, right. And what do we have on Sunday nights in the fall and winter?
Okay, football?
Football.
Uh-oh.
Think the NFL is going to not have any football games on Sunday night? Or even at 4 o'clock when a lot of churches have services for young families? Okay. Now, if someone says, I'm going to watch, or let's create a scenario here. Suppose, based upon what we've seen so far, but suppose we get to December 24th and the Patriots are playing in the evening of Christmas Eve, and if they win the game, they're going to make it into the playoffs. Okay. Do you stay home and watch the Patriots, or do you go to church and celebrate the gift of God's only begotten Son?
She helped us record it.
Well, exactly. They have things called DVRs now. You know what I should do? This is the stinker in me. I should, and I don't even know if the Patriots are playing on Christmas Eve, and there's not much of a likelihood that they're going to be playing to get into the playoffs at this point. But my little fantasy all of a sudden was that we, finish singing Silent Night, and just before we blow out the candles, I say, oh, by the way, the Patriots lost.
Yeah.
For all the people who recorded it.
Yeah, right. I don't know why my brain is thinking this way. So many years ago, I auditioned to be on Jeopardy. Didn't make it. That's okay. It was out in Los Angeles, and one of my ultimate fantasies is to be on Jeopardy, and for the final Jeopardy category to be the Bible. And my ultimate fear is to get the answer wrong on national television. Everybody knows I'm a minister. But God doesn't want part of us. God wants all of us, okay? And, you can't go like say, well, God, I'll give you Sunday morning, but, the rest of the week is for me. You make God first throughout your day-to-day life. And it's going to make some hard choices at times, but it's also going to lead to a life that is much better. And that is why God is jealous. God wants all of us, because when we give God all of ourselves, God knows that we will be better off.
I think that the concept of God wanting all of us is difficult for us in that we aren't willing to give up. We aren't willing to surrender. In other words,
Yeah, you have to surrender to God.
Yeah, and that's a hard thing for each of us to come out of our selfishness, to surrender to that request. When we consider it, as we discussed this morning, that God's request of jealousy is for us.
Yep.
It's not for God.
Right.
But in order to get there, to go through.
Well, that's something new. We haven't had that happen in a long time.
No.
That was the sound system.
Somebody in the sanctuary.
No?
Oh, speaking of that, we're gonna have that 220 thing today. Do you want to shut these systems down so that it doesn't pick things up?
Oh, the
The
FEMA?
national test.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You might want to.
That's a little concerning. We haven't had that happen in a good year or so, so we'll have to investigate that. So, God,
Mice.
what's that? Mice?
Or is it Martha?
Martha?
Yeah.
Marcia.
Oh, no, he's talking. So we have a robotic vacuum cleaner
Yeah.
in there, and we nicknamed it Martha, as in
okay.
Mary and Martha. No, Martha's only in there on Fridays, from
Okay.
what I understand. So, we do. We have all kinds of gods out there. Look at the sports on Sunday morning. What is that telling us?
Right.
That, that's the God, at least on Sunday morning. And parents will come to me and they'll say, well, can't you say something to these coaches? And I'll say, they're not going to listen to me. The only way they're going to listen is if all of the parents get together and say, we're not going to have our kids come on Sunday morning for practice or a game. So either you accommodate the schedule or you don't have a team.
The parents are saying, you do it for us, rather than us do it, because quite frankly, the problem is, if they want to be here and make the commitment, then they need to say to the other, no, I'm not doing it.
And
It's not
sadly,
your job.
but sadly, the response when a parent does that is the coach will say, well, just take them to mass on Saturday.
Yeah.
Because we live in such a predominantly Catholic area of the country. It reminds me of the phone call I got many years ago, and guy calls and says, we're having a special basketball game or something, and I can't remember. It was players on the high school team against, I'm just kind of making this up, but Patriot alumni, or how they do those games as fundraisers. And he said, we hope that Union Congregational Church will support the youth of the community by taking out an ad for the booklet that will be given to everyone. And so I said, we believe very strongly in supporting the youth of the community. But, before I answer your question, I need to ask a couple of questions myself. And I said, does your league have any games on Sunday morning? Actually, it was a soccer, one of the soccer leagues in town. And he said, I said, do you have practices on Sunday morning? He says, yeah. And I said, do you have any games on Sunday morning? And he said, yes. And I said, well, so look at it this way. We want to support the youth, but why would we support an organization that puts parents in the position of having to decide if their kids are going to go to soccer practice or a soccer game on Sunday morning and go to church? I swear. He says, oh, I never thought of it that way. Does that mean you don't want an ad?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I said, look, if you would commit your league to not having practices or games on Sunday morning, I'll take out my checkbook and take out a full-page ad personally. Didn't go anywhere. You shall have no other gods before me. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God.
And who is the God for the parents or families that they don't have any sports obligations or any TV to watch, but don't come on Sunday mornings anymore?
That's a good question. So people that don't have other obligations, they just don't come anymore.
Right.
Sadly, that is a reflection of our secular society. Now, the question is, why is it becoming more and more of a secular society? And I think that there are a number of reasons for that. And I don't think it's one answer fits everyone. I think part of the reason is that people don't like being told what to do. And if you take God seriously, that includes a God who says, thou shalt not. And the word that is most hated in the English language is no. No, you can't do that. I will give you an example. When school started up, okay, North Reading has a habit of building schools with inadequate parking. So the bachelor school next door. Okay, the parking lot that they built for that school is sufficient as long as there are no more than 3 guests in the building when the teachers and the staff are all there. So where did the parents park? Here. So I was leaving, it was a little after 2, time for dismissal over there. As I was getting into my car, I noticed that in the far end of this parking lot over here, there were a couple of cars that had parked beyond the lined spaces. And so I was curious if that made it impossible to loop around. So I drove my car and I went around the corner. And interestingly enough, we can get a couple more spots over there and cars can still get by. But as I came around the corner, there's this big white Lexus parked in the only opening left. I couldn't get out. So I rolled down my window. I said, excuse me, please move. I need to leave. Nothing. So I said it a little louder and I hear this voice said, in a minute. And so I started to get out of the car and it was a grandmother. And she leans her head out of the car and she says, you don't bother getting out. I'm still not leaving. And I said, so I walked over. I said, you leave it. You're blocking the area. I'll leave in a minute. I said, no, you need to leave now. No, I'll leave in a minute. And she called my bluff because I said, well, look, I said, do I need to call 911? She said, go ahead. Now, let me ask you, who's God? Or what is that woman's God? And this is another one, herself, me. Okay, that is the ultimate God for a lot of people. So that's one of the reasons why some people aren't coming. Another reason is it's a lot easier to sleep in.
Was she driving a Lexus, you said?
I think it was big, like what?
A
Like
Lexus or a
A Maserati or.
it was an expensive car.
Or a Escalade. Well, those cars have, when you buy the car, they come with a priority.
Well, I think
Apparently that no other, there were no other cars before us.
yeah,
And-
there were no other cars before us.
Yeah, exactly.
I just kind of shook my head. So then I had to back up. And, at this point, there isn't a lot of space to do that. And as I was kind of doing a 6-point turn to come back this way, the car on the end started backing up. And so I had to honk my horn because she was in the same position because she couldn't get out either. And, the Trinity that some people worship today is me, myself, and I. So there's that aspect. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. It's a lot easier to just sleep in. And, and I will also add some of it we have to take on ourselves. Okay, I remember going to a seminar many years ago when I was in seminary, and the person leading the seminar began by saying, we need to congratulate ourselves. And we were all looking at each other and saying, okay, what did we do that we need to congratulate ourselves? And he went on to say, we have succeeded in doing the impossible. We have made Jesus Christ boring. And I thought, wow, this is boring for some people. So we need to do a better job of packaging our product. And I think also another aspect of it is that because we live in an increasingly secular society, people out there lump us all together in one category of people when it comes to people of faith, and that is conservative evangelical.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not, shame on you, you're going to hell, culture wars and all of that. So, which is why I've said for the last few years that we need to do a better job of marketing ourselves so that people out there understand that we're not like that. That here, we might not all agree, but it is not a sin to be different.
Marketing, I'm going to bring up the stewardship campaign because there were 2 relevant things in each of our last 2 speakers.
Okay.
one relates to better marketing, which I think that has done a good job.
Yeah.
The second thing is the reason for each of them, which happened to have been a policy change in and out of the church, and why they came to this.
Oh, interesting. I
Because
thought
they
that,
were being told what to do or being restricted.
Yep.
And that goes along with that idea of being told what to do. And that motivated them to come to a more image-wise open church, which ours is.
yeah, it was in regards to the closed table.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Well, everyone, I thank you. I am going to go and see if I can write a sermon now. Thank you all.
When you just